Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Batel Blai Soltanic. I'm the Executive Director of the Aid Coalition, and I'll be your MC today. Before we get started, if you need captioning, there is information in the chat for your use. Please use the Q&A for all questions, including technical support. This webinar is brought to you by the Aid Coalition and Hope for Israel Alliances. Aid Coalition is a U.S. nonprofit, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to strengthen and preserve the democratic foundations of the State of Israel. Since the tragedy of October 7th, Aid Coalition has managed a platform that supported dozens of social projects and organizations. Hope for Israel Alliances is a grassroots Zionist movement that advocates for Israel as envisioned in Israel's Declaration of Independence. It fights against anti-Semitism and, most importantly, supports the campaign to release the hostages held by Hamas. Today, we mark 552 days that the hostages are still in hell. We will keep fighting for them until the last one returns home. Before we dive in, as part of this webinar, Aid Coalition would like to raise awareness to the elections for the World Zionist Congress. Online ballots are open now, and every Jew, every Israeli over 18 residing in the United States can and must vote. I don't know how many of you have heard of the World Zionist Congress elections. In short, this is the Jewish People's Board meeting deciding how to allocate $5 billion. Most of us don't vote, so small groups decide how to spend the money with no transparency. Just think about it. If you own shares in a Fortune 500 company, would you skip the board meeting? No. Yet, an election is happening now where we can directly decide, will these funds rebuild the devastated communities of the North and the South, support core education, mechinot kdam tzvayot, and protect democracy? Or will these funds, $5 billion, be funneled to sectarian groups and non-democratic agendas? And that's why we're here today. I know this is one of the only ways I, as an Israeli or a Jew in the US, can influence Israel's future. The Aid Coalition is made up of some of the most impressive Israeli Americans of our generation. Our speakers today, leaders in tech, business, and policy, who are ready at a moment's notice to jump back into reserves duty for Israel's future. So I'm not asking you to quit your job, not asking you to make aliyah yet. I'm only asking for one thing, your vote. It takes 5 minutes of your time. It costs $5, a registration fee, and it helps determine how $5 billion will be spent. Again, every Jew, every Israeli person in the US is eligible to vote. And in this election, every single vote counts. This is our moment. Let's use it. Please scan the QR code on the screen and take action now. Spread the word among your network. Israel's future is being decided. Be part of it. We hope that you join us in this quest championing this important mission. And today, as mentioned, joining us are tech leaders and supporters for the Aid Coalition's mission. Brian Rosenzweig. Brian is a co-founder and general partner at Joule Ventures, which for the past 15 years has been leading seed rounds in Israel enterprise technology businesses, commercializing in the US market. He is a dual Israeli-American citizen who currently resides in Atlanta, Georgia with his wife and his 4- and 7-year-old children. Karen Kay, member of global community in VC and co-founder of Supersonas, Israeli nonprofit working toward a balanced presence of women in influential and decision-making positions by raising awareness for gender equality. Eyal Bino. Eyal is founding partner of 97212 Ventures, a New York-based seed fund focused exclusively on investing in Israeli startups and helping them build global businesses in New York. Eyal has almost 2 decades of experience in venture space, working with and investing in Israeli companies. Born in Tel Aviv, educated in New York, Eyal's passion has always been merging these two and giving rise to exceptional Israeli entrepreneurs. Renan Gutman. Renan is the Chief Product Officer with Ramapi. Renan has spent over 20 years in leading positions in tech companies and recently switched over to biotech. We'll ask her about that. And Michal Gilon. Michal Gilon and I is a partner in Two Lanterns Venture Capital, investing in early-stage software startup in the US and Israel. Prior to that, Michal started her career in an Israeli digital health company, and then was the founder and director of entrepreneurship programs in 3 academic institutions in the US and Israel, Reichman University, MIT, and NYU School of Medicine. Michal received computer science and law degrees from Tel Aviv University and MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management. Without further ado, let's get our conversation started. And Brian, I'm going to direct this first question to you. Be sensitive of time so we can hear everyone. Brian, Over the last 4 years, we have seen a steady and fairly dramatic decline in the number of active investors in Israel. Some people are concerned, but you actually think this is a good thing. Why, in your mind, is less capital in Israel's tech ecosystem is a good thing right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. First off, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and this is a wonderful cause and a wonderful organization. When we got started 15 years ago investing in Israel, there wasn't as defined a financing ecosystem as there is today, and it was harder for Israeli startups to come by early stage funding. And what that really required was for companies or entrepreneurs to really put together a much more solid vision as to how they were going to take technology and business and meld those together. And it forced companies to really focus on the fundamentals and to build strong businesses, not just aim for headlines, aim for hype, and put really trendy buzzwords in their deck and go out and raise a bunch of capital. And so it really forced founders to build good businesses. Fast forward to call it 2018, 2019, there was this influx of venture capital. Capital became too available, if you will, in global markets, and Israel wasn't spared from this sort of influx of capital. What that ultimately did was it created this proliferation of startups in Israel. I would say that it diluted, if you will, the quality of some of Israel's startup ecosystem, sending funding or directing funding to companies that frankly didn't need funding or didn't deserve funding. Now that sort of funding, there's been this venture market reset and funding has sort of receded in Israel. And certainly after October 7th, as foreign investors have become more skittish, although they are coming back in pre-October 7th numbers, we are seeing that there is this general decline in capital. And what that's doing is it's forcing companies back to the fundamentals. It's forcing founders to really do more with less and to be more thoughtful about their businesses and to be more thoughtful about their metrics and to be more thoughtful about their products and to be more thoughtful about their go-to-market strategies before they go out and raise capital. And when they do, to have really strong underlying metrics. And so what we're seeing right now, because there is sort of this shortage or this decrease in capital, we're seeing a higher quality of more mature startups at the early stage. So overall, we think that this is going to be good for the long term of Israel's startup ecosystem.
Thank you, Brian. Moving to Karen. So Karen, despite political instability, war, and even the challenges of COVID, the Israeli cybersecurity sector continues to attack massive investments, with recently being a prime example. Why do you think the cyber remains Israel's most resilient and attractive tech sector?
So first of all, good evening, everyone. I think that cybersecurity is the one tech domain where Israel is a true global superpower, not just a significant player. Cyber is deeply embedded in Israeli society. It's not just an industry, it's like a national mission. And even in times of political uncertainty or global disruption, cyber thrives in Israel because it's built on real world threats and not just theoretical ones. And investors recognize this. Israeli cyber companies consistently deliver results, with acquisition by Google being a defining example. And I think that this acquisition is not only a vote of confidence in Wiz, but in the entire Israeli cyber ecosystem and tech ecosystem.
Thank you, Karen. Eyal, moving to you. Do you think that Israel still has an edge on other countries when it comes to innovation, or has the world literally caught up?
This is kind of a loaded question. So, hi, everyone. Good evening. It's great to be here among other investors who I truly appreciate and love, and we've done some stuff together. I think I'm the only investor who also has not a founder, but a person on an amazing company that I invested in and I have high hopes for on this panel. So Israel has an edge, I think, obviously in cyber and in specific domains where there is kind of heavy technologies. But I think what's happening now is kind of like almost two things at once. On one hand, you have the Israeli innovation level that's going up. I think AI, obviously, 47% of investments in Israel over the past year have been in AI companies. Um, so I think clearly Israeli founders have kind of bounced back after October 7th. There was a period of time where I think, founders and investors are just trying to kind of figure out what to do and how to handle it. I think on the other hand, we're looking at the political situation in Israel, and it's definitely a concern for both investors and founders. There's challenges. I mean, there's obviously a lot of talk about the migration of Israeli founders to New York and to the US in general. I think the challenges around flying to New York and flying to the US, we only had Elal as the essentially only airline flying to the US from Israel over the past probably 18 months. And now finally the skies are clear, and you can see the difference, right? So I think on one hand, I think what's really driving innovation in Israel is the kind of the Israeli mindset, which is we're gonna make this work at essentially all cost, and I think that's not gonna change. And he actually got even stronger over the last 18 months, and you can see how resilient Israeli founders are. But on the other hand, I think the political situation is really posing threat to the to foreign investment in Israel, to the way customers are looking at Israel, and I think this is something we need to pay close attention to.
Thank you, Eyal. Michal, moving to founders, what do you think are the unique traits of Israeli founders in the tech industry? And if you have any specific advice to give founders?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, and thank you, Batel, also for mentioning and stressing the hostage situation. I think that's the one thing that should be on top of everyone's minds all the time. But of course, the most important industry in Israel is the innovation economy, and I think it is thanks to the amazing founders that are there. So there are super smart and well-trained people in Israel. There are smart founders in many other countries too, but I think the training is very unique. And I think that's one of the things that really make them stand out. It's a combination of very, very strong academic institutions and very high quality technology that is developed in the military units that then finds its commercial applications. So that's one thing that's unique. I think a second thing is the personality of Israeli founders. They tend to be, I find, much more resourceful than others. They make, a lot of very little resources typically by thinking very creatively and being very original. And the last thing is what Eyal was just talking about briefly, which is the resilience. I think Israeli founders, probably because of the environment that we grow up in Israel, are much more resilient because they're used to facing all kinds of challenges and risks that other people in other places don't. So I think these founders end up being more comfortable with risk, more willing to hear 15 no's from investors or customers or anyone else and keep going. And just, thinking about the challenges that they faced in the past couple of years, and in particular since the beginning of the war. And at least in our portfolio, despite all those challenges and hardships, they are performing better than our portfolio overall of US companies. So that I think is super impressive. So I would say in terms of advice, keep working hard, keep up that spirit of fighting and being resilient. And it's a very tough time, and hopefully with hard work and dedication, you can still succeed and build great companies. We're seeing that.
Thank you, Michal. Moving to Renan, I mentioned actually that you, after 20 years, being a tech executive in the industry, you transitioned to biotech. So Why? This is an interesting question if you can share. And how are you leveraging all of Israel's superpowers in technology and AI to disrupt their healthcare and bring better drugs to the market?
Sure. So first evening to everyone who joined us today, and I'm excited to be part of this forum, and hi to Eyal as well. The shout out for being an early believer in Remapi. And I think, I'll answer the first question, the personal one, about moving from like classic tech to biotech. So we often laugh about it that it's actually we moved to tech bio and not really biotech, with the tech side leading it. And I actually think, part of the interesting pieces and what drove me to it is this ability to learn a new field and to understand a new field and come into it, I think is part of where I get most excited and where I think there's challenges and interesting places to see. So I think part of, my colleagues here all alluded to it, is not being scared to step into a place you don't really know, and jumping right into learning something very interesting. And I think for us, solving a very big problem, we're seeing an area where we can really make a difference is a huge item for this. So I think for us, that's been an important piece of the puzzle, and why, it seemed very natural to just hop on the next big thing and think about how we address that. When I think about specifically at Remapi, we're really focused on creating the next generation of drugs, what we call hybrid drugs, which is a combination of a pharmaceutical drug and we'll call it the digital molecule or a digital drug. We're really looking ourselves as the new digital R&D for pharma. And it's an exciting new place. It's a very different place. But I think one of the interesting things is, we're a new startup. So we were born into this world of AI, and we were born into this world. So I think today most startups don't call themselves cloud startups, even though maybe if you remember a few years back, if you were SaaS, that was like your headline, like we're a new cloud startup. And today it's a given. So we're native AIers, and AI is just part of the set of tools that we always work with and are always in there. We were just born into it. So I think for us, it's really about thinking about how to get those superpowers and how to put them into a real problem that's changing and impacting people's lives. And I think that's for us the critical piece. So for us, it's thinking about the Israeli superpowers. I think everyone here said it. It's the people, and it's the people who are not scared to take all of these different tools and different capabilities and push their limits, and to see how we can use our knowledge of technology and bring in the smartest people on the clinical side to really bring better drugs to the market and improve people's lives. So probably a good time to plug in also that we're hiring. So I don't know if anyone on the line is, but
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great time for that. Getting back to you, Brian, between 2020 and 2022, most VCs were investing as much as they could, as fast as they could, as new billion-dollar companies were seemingly being minted daily. But you and Jewel were doing the opposite. You were sellers. You took advantage of what has become a very popular market, the secondary market. Why did Jewel assume this position?
Yeah, so again, we've been around for this will be our 16th year. We're currently investing out of our fifth fund, which means that we've seen the ups and downs of various markets. We've seen good times and bad times. We've seen times to deploy capital aggressively, and we've come across times to create liquidity for our investors. And one thing that we've come to understand is that if you don't recognize, at least in venture capital, if you don't recognize when you come upon those liquidity windows and when you come upon those times to aggressively deploy, you're going to have some very unhappy investors. And thankfully, we've had some investors that have been with us for a very long time, and I think it's because we've recognized when there's time to buy and when there's time to sell. And it wasn't just in Israel, but starting in around 2019. We really started to see valuations in funding rounds in Israel come together that really made no sense from both a dollar standpoint and a valuation standpoint. There was a specific company of ours that went from a pre-seed round that we had done to a seed round, within 6 months at 4 times the valuation with no change in product or revenue, to a Series A at almost a 50, maybe even a $60 million valuation within a year, with again no change in product or revenue. And at that point, we kind of looked at ourselves and we said, this market's this is turning into a seller's market. And so at that point, we decided to start, looking at ways to monetize some of our high performing assets. And from 2020 to 2022, we created a whole bunch of liquidity for our investors in the secondary markets. And I think that is really what has separated us from some of the other VCs in the market, is again knowing when there's time to sell and when there's time to buy. And I think now that we've kind of entered into this window where everybody's looking for liquidity, or a lot of VCs are looking for liquidity, I think that we're in a really great place to aggressively deploy in Israel, and we're doing so as much as we can. We're seeing great opportunities in great conditions, and we're seeing some great and exceptionally talented Israeli entrepreneurs coming to market, solving big problems in big industries, and we're excited to be doing so. So, knowing where we are in a macro cycle, it really plays out, to the advantage of our investors, and we're just happy to be at the table right now.
Thanks, Brian. Karen, I want to ask you about cross-border collaboration, the global and local. You actually operate between New York and Tel Aviv, and I was wondering, how do you see the role of cross-border collaboration in shaping the next chapter of Israeli innovation?
Well, I think the title of this webinar mentions Startup Nation, and it's like became a term, but it's not. Startup Nation is not only Israel. Today it's distributed. Look at us here around this webinar. We're all American Israelis or Israeli Americans. We represent Israel, and we're all around. So it's more of a global network today than an Israeli ecosystem, and it comes with tons of responsibility. I just came back from Cybertech Global Tel Aviv. I don't know. I didn't see any other sector who brings, in the middle of a war, where still flights are not that easy. So many people from so many countries wanting to engage with Israeli tech. And again, it was people from all around the world, from big companies, from startups, from governments, and Startup Nation wasn't an Israeli thing. It was like, this strong network of like-minded people. And the responsibility that comes with it is that we don't only represent our businesses, and we're not only building things for our own, just personal profit. It's really building something from scratch that will influence the world. And that's our reputation right now. And it's not a good time for our reputation. So I think it puts more on our shoulders as people part of this global network. And I personally carry this responsibility with me every single day. For every meeting I go to, every Zoom call I have, it's not only me and Cybertech and Israeli tech. It's about representing Israel and the nice side of Israel and the hope that Israel brings to a better future for itself and for the world.
Thanks, Karen. Well said. Michal, in terms of Israeli innovation and what Karen just touched base, what do you think is actually needed to ensure the future of Israeli innovation as bright as it's been till now?
I think it's two things. One is an investment in the future generation, in education in particular of the future generation. And the second is maintaining a business-friendly environment, which means in Israel that is democratic and where there's no threat, to the judicial branch or to the rule of law in general, where investors can put their money into companies and be certain that those companies, will operate in an environment that is, an environment like we have today and no different than that. In terms of education, though, and I think that's probably the most important thing in terms of thinking about the future entrepreneurs, it's, I think, super critical, and it's a combination too of two things. One is returning general education and STEM in particular to the top of the list of priorities, which I feel like it was when I was growing up in Israel, and I think that's been eroded, unfortunately, over the past 10 or 15 years from what I hear from a lot of people I trust about this in Israel now. I think that should be a top priority, to continue to invest in that general education and a very strong science and technology part of it. And not, just in more sectorial things that we see, unfortunately, becoming stronger and stronger. And I think another part of it is a very different kind but important education of the values that I feel that we grew up on, which is, again, democracy and ethical behavior. And I feel like those are not, they're still shared by the majority of Israeli society, which is what gives me hope, but not always by the people who are setting, the direction and the policy. So I think that's super important. So education and maintaining a democratic and business-friendly environment.
We're going to get back to that because it seems like everyone has somehow touched the connection between tech and policy in Israel and how it reflects the entire ecosystem. But before we do that, I want to ask Renan, and maybe it could shed more light, how important is the Israeli network for startups?
I think it's super important. I mean, I think when you're thinking about, who to ask a question, you always look for the Israeli, and you say, "Oh, I'm just going to reach out to someone out of the blue," and they'll answer. And I think it's part of the culture that everyone talked about how that people will vouch for each other, and that the tenacity and grit of Israelis is shared, understood, and accepted and seen as a positive. So I think that Israeli network, and I'll also say I think it's even broader to the Jewish network, but definitely the Israeli network has been a huge asset in the way that we're building startups and in the way that we're able to operate globally. It's something that I think is, of huge value to every founder and every startup that is trying to learn a new market, do something new, understand the real situation, just explain it to me in Hebrew, or tell me it and tell me what's really happening, right? And I think is a lot of times what we go in. But I think the fact that you can really reach out to anyone out of nowhere because they have an Israeli name and you have an Israeli name, and that they'll get back to you, and that they'll be on your side, is something that honestly I think it's so unique, and what makes us special.
Thanks, Renan. I want to direct a question to the entire panel, but before that, I want to touch base with you, Brian, about one more topic that seems super important to founders. Jewel prides itself on doing all of its technology and market due diligence in the United States. Can you explain how that helps founders?
Yeah. Well, it's not, Israel's a small ecosystem, right? No secret. You got 10 million people in Israel, of which only about 350,000 or so are employed in high tech, right? And so, it's a really tiny ecosystem, and it's really an impossible ecosystem in which to exclusively commercialize your technology. There's a lot of VCs in Israel, though, that do a lot of their validation in Israel, which, that's how they do their business. That's fine. But our goal is to get these companies to the US and help them commercialize in the US. That's their end goal. That's their end market. That's where the buyers are. That's where the money is. That's where their next set of investors are. That's where their acquirers are. That's where their capital markets are. And so that's where we want to validate the technology. And by the way, a lot of founders in their validation process as well, before they even get to us, they spend most of their time validating their technology in Israel with founders that are in their circle, or a degree or two removed from their circle. And so most of that validation, most of the feedback they've gotten on their technology today has come from Israel. And so they're really operating within this, bubble, if you will, this echo chamber. By getting them out of that echo chamber and bringing them to the US, and as part of our due diligence, putting them in front of corporate decision makers here in the US, we get them out of that echo chamber and we get them in front of decision makers here in the US that are ultimately going to be their end customer. And so we get them really third party, arm's length, objective feedback that tells them and tells us whether they're really onto something. And so I think this is really helpful for founders, not only to give them an indication of whether they're really onto something, whether they're working on a solution to a real problem, and whether that solution is on point. But I think it also helps them to iterate faster than they would just kind of continuing to work on their technology, with design partners in Israel. So we think, getting that feedback in the US at an early stage is mission critical for these startups to, accelerate their commercialization.
Interesting. Eyal, in that regard, like moving from due diligence to M&A, that's not a fast move, but it could happen very quick. What's the state of M&As and foreign investments in Israel post October 7th? Where do you think it's headed?
So that's a good question. By the way, a lot of really good points here. I think I agree with Karen that we invest in Israeli founders in general, so not just in Israel but also in the US. And our associate, who's actually one of the participants on this webinar, he did a research on stealth mode founders that are in New York, just specifically in New York, and he found over 125 founders who are Israelis based in New York working on something new, right? So those are like really incredible numbers. And I think it shows you that there's a trend of more and more Israeli founders either leaving companies where they were maybe an early employee at a startup that was successful, or maybe came out of universities, post MBA, etc. So I think that's an interesting trend. On the M&A side, so October 7th happened. Obviously, everyone was shocked. I think what we thought is that it's basically, the story is basically closed for a while. And I think what happened was after the kind of initial shock, it's actually the opposite. So last year was the most successful M&A year for Israel with over $18 billion in exits. Obviously, cyber is kind of the dominant industry where you see, a lot of companies getting bought. And then, you look at 2025, Waze is sold to Google for 32 billion. So we already, just with one deal, almost doubled the amount of capital that we generated from M&As, right? So I think that's a good sign. I think where I see a trend and hopefully something that's going to be developed over time is that M&As are going to continue to happen because I think a lot of corporates are recognizing what's happening in Israel and that there's so much great talent in Israel, and companies who are moving from ideas to building businesses, in a reasonable amount of time. And two, I think it's going to happen in other industries and not just in cyber, right? I think Ramapi is a great example where the network kind of brought together some of the most amazing founders and kind of early employees in a company that we believe can be a game changer in the healthcare industry. And I think that company, if all the stars align, will have the potential to be the Waze of healthcare, right? So I think that's on that. I think again, I'm going back to the policy, and I think that what's happening now in Israel with the democracy not being where it should be, and with policymakers. I mean, I think what's really interesting in this panel is that what everyone says makes sense, but then you look at the policymakers, and they really don't make a lot of sense with the policies that they're actually holding right now. So I think what we need is just to make sure that we preserve democracy and an environment that corporates, investors, especially foreign investors, feel comfortable doing business. Because otherwise, we're going to see a trend of more and more Israelis coming here and just starting, not just to like incorporate here, which has been a trend over the last couple of years versus incorporating in Israel, but also just starting from scratch, which in some ways I think make lives of VCs like us who are based in New York and in the US a little easier. But I think we don't want to have kind of a brain drain of coming out of Israel.
So Eyal, you actually and everyone emphasized the importance and the connection, the imminent connection between the startup nation, Israel remaining a startup nation and continuing to strive, to core education, into policy and decision making within Israel. And this is actually Israel's democratic foundation. So I want to ask all of you, what role do you believe that Israeli Americans, particularly those that are involved in tech and innovation, can play in helping safeguard and support Israel's democratic values foundations from abroad? Let's have it as an open discussion, but I want to start with you, Karen.
I'll say two things. First of all, in my past, I have a few years in advertising, and Israel is also a brand. And whether we like it or not, if you're an investor or entrepreneur, you're carrying this brand with you. And when it's high and strong, you benefit from it. And when it's decreasing and damaged, you suffer from it. And we need to keep this brand strong, liberal, and democratic. And for us, Israeli Americans, being silent is not being neutral. It's creating more damage. And we have the power. Again, I'm I'm belittled by next to everyone here, but we have the power to raise our voices, not to sit in tables that with people that are damaging this brand, taking a stand, doing whatever we can. Again, it doesn't have to do directly with what we're talking about today, but my oldest daughter went to a meeting with families of the hostages tonight in New York. Like there were 10 people there. And it broke my heart. And if we're one network and if we're a positive and strong brand, it's about that. We need to be in those places. We need to demonstrate. We need to vote when we can. And I think Aid Coalition is a good example for an opportunity that cannot be missed. That's the little that we can do as Israeli Americans here, and especially as tech leaders. It's not only our privilege, seriously, it's our responsibility, and it's mandatory.
Any other thoughts from the panelists?
First of all, Karen, I think everything you say, is strong and is recognized, I think, by everyone. I've been in New York for 20 years. I went to college here. I got my education here. This is probably since October 7th. It's the first time where I felt where Jews, American Jews and Israelis feel a connection. There's a bond, right? Like we are in this together, if we like it or not, right? We don't have another Israel. We have to make sure that it's not a given, right? We have to make sure that that brand, that powerhouse of talent is going to continue to be nurtured, just like a flower, right? Like a tree. If we don't water that tree, I think that tree is just. I listened to a podcast this week with a brother of Alon Shimriz, who was one of the hostages who unfortunately got killed by our own soldiers. And at the end, Chaim, who was the interviewer, he basically said, why don't you go to politics? Like the house is burning, right? Like we need to make sure that I don't want to say we need to save our house because I think we're still far from there, but we need to come together as one to be able to not, survive, but thrive out of this really terrible situation that we've been facing with. And I think also woke up a lot of us, and I think one of the things we haven't done here on this panel is really thank Batel, because Batel is really the driver behind the Aid Coalition and behind basically saying, we cannot just stand on the side and let others kind of dictate our lives. So I think I'm actually excited about the opportunity to work together to kind of bridge the gap between Israelis and Jews. And I think when I was in Israel about a year ago on a mission with very high level people, I think the consensus was that everyone felt like we needed them and they needed us. Like we it's not just like about coming to Israel Day Parade on Fifth Avenue on Yom Ha'atzmaut, right? Like I think we have to be in it together, and we have to nurture I think the complementary talents of Israelis and Jews who are very different, because they just grow up differently. But I think I think we're in it together, and everyone recognize it.
Thanks, Eyal. Anyone else that want to add their thoughts about this topic? If not, I'm going to move to a couple Q&A that we got from the audience and maybe some personal questions later on. We'll see. So we got one question that is asking, what is needed to happen for Israel to continue leading the world of tech?
That's like, so are you.
Go ahead, Brian.
Eyal, you wanted to take that one?
No, I just feel like you're like the perfect person to answer it.
Me? I'm just, Bavakasha. I'll take a quick stab. I think, Israelis are naturally entrepreneurial. So I don't worry about, the startup pipeline, so to speak, or the talent pipeline. But I do think that we need to nurture it. And I think that to do so and to ensure that that pipeline stays robust and healthy, I think we are going to have to continue to make an investment in getting more of the Orthodox into the workforce. I think we are going to have to make sure that more women are getting into tech. I think we are going to have to make sure that the Arab Israeli community feels welcomed in tech. I think we are going to have to broaden that out. It can't just be just Israeli Jews, male Israeli Jews in tech. But I will say, there. And I don't want to call it silver lining, but the outcome or the byproduct of October 7th, call it years down the road, is that R&D funding from the military is going to skyrocket over the coming, decade. That is going to produce a disproportionate amount of talent in the market relative to what we have now. And so if you look at Israel's startup ecosystem 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, assuming we're making the necessary human capital investments to what I mentioned earlier, if you're receiving all of that R&D output that the military has invested in and applying that to the private sector in the form of these startups, I think Israel's startup ecosystem, its high-tech sector, is going to be even better 10, 20 years from now than it is today.
Thanks, Brian. Renan, Michal, Karen, Eyal, you want to add anything?
I mean, I'll go back to Michal's point, and I think Eyal, you mentioned it before as well, but I think education is key, and investing in education and in STEM education is going to be a key piece here. And I agree completely with Brian. Like there's a lot of funds going into into defense and into those areas, but those are also the melting pot for Israel, and those are also opportunity creators across the board. And I think so the money that's going in there is part of that, and it's about creating opportunities, and it's about creating that. And I think the more we expand those opportunities and we're able to grow that, that's going to be our ability. But I think I would kind of join a lot of what Karen said here, and I think it's on us not to give up. I think it's easy to maybe give up and say, oh, like, I can't help, or what can I do with this? But I think it ends up being, it kind of takes one and then another one and then another one before you're actually able to create an impact. And again, kind of going back to what I said before, our network of Israelis can turn the world upside down. So I think we should use that for our own sake as well.
If I may, I would like to add that I think that as Israel mature and as the tech industry matures, it's not the story of tech. It becomes now a story of values. And in a sense, or in that sense, Israeli tech reflects, Israel. And yes, we're resilient and we're adaptive and we're, we're united, but it's not a given. And we need to, put those values up there, remember them, fight for them, because that's the narrative. It's not about the algorithm. It's not about the tech. It's really about a cluster of values that we all share and that are, not on stable grounds those days. So I can only think about Renan, doing her job, and because it's the hardest job in the world, founding a company. And on top of that, I'm telling her, but you have to, work for values and work for Israel. But yep, that's part of what we need to do. And that's what makes us Startup Nation.
Correct. There are a few questions that relate to October 7th. So we're going to take one last question, and then we're going to start concluding. We have a question from the audience that says how October 7th impacted the state of Israel tech. What steps companies can take to rebuild confidence, investor sentiments? And if you can add to that, how do you see the near future and the horizon for the tech industry? So feel free to discuss this topic. I combined a couple questions so we can answer as most.
Maybe I'll start just about I think the initial impact of October 7th. Actually, we have to take one step back before October 7th. There was a whole year of judicial reform where if founders wanted to meet investors, they actually had to go to Kaplan to see them in demonstrations. So there was 2023 globally has been a slower year when it comes to investments, but in Israel, I think it's been even worse because people's attention and investors' attention was somewhere else, which was about trying to, I don't want to say stop the judicial reform, but at least slow it down and have their voice heard. Then October 7th happened, and there was essentially a movement by VCs, by Israeli VCs, to show that we're still here. We're still investing. I think you could see something that was, now that you think about it now, it's maybe can bring you a smile, but a lot of VCs went on LinkedIn and said, hey, I usually don't do that, but I just want to let you know that I just signed a term sheet for a company that I am going to invest in. And, we're not stopping, right? Like, I think everyone in the venture scene in Israel wanted to show, hey, we keep moving, we keep investing. We don't want to let the world see an Israeli tech scene collapsing. So I think that was, I think very, very smart. And I think a lot of great companies are being formed or have been formed post-October 7th. And I think a lot of founders felt like, hey, this is actually a good time to go and build a company. And investors basically said, well, if this founder is leaving everything and now is about to build his own company against all odds, that's a founder I want to invest in. I think one of the challenges we actually didn't talk about it much on this call is the issue of reservists. I mean, a lot of the companies have had 25 to 30, 40% of their employees go on reserve. Some have been in reserve for a couple months. Some have been in reserve for over 300 days. I mean, those are really insane numbers that impact people, personal life, their families, and also companies, right? We actually have a company, just to give you a little story. We have a company where the top sales guy had been on reserve for about, I don't know, maybe 250 days. And he was called to go on reserve, and he's a very patriotic guy. And he was called on reserve a couple of weeks ago again, and the CEO basically had to tell him, like, listen, you're like my top sales guy. If there's not like an imminent war right now, like if you're going, it's really going to impact the company tremendously. So I just want to make sure that if you're going, just do it because not because you really have to, but you not because you want to, but really you have to. So I think that's on that. I think on the venture side, I think what's really interesting is that there was a little bit of a pause when it comes to venture investing from foreign funds in the beginning. But then after a few months, some of the big VCs actually opened offices in Israel. So Sequoia, Excel, and some of the other VCs have actually made it back to Israel, raised prices, which little guys like me don't really like, but it is what it is. And the venture scene now is, I think, as active as ever, and I'm sure everyone on the panel can probably sense this. So I think I'm trying to answer like a bunch of questions in one answer, but I think what's really exciting for founders is that A, with the evolution of AI, it's a great time to build a company, and two, there's a ton of capital out there, and there's a lot of VCs like us who are looking for great companies and great founders to invest in. So if you have something in mind, you should totally go for it.
Thanks, Eyal. I have one more question. Maybe Brian, you can take answer that. So Orlene asked, how will U.S. tariffs, assuming they are reinstated in 90 days, affect prospects for Israeli tech's relationship with U.S. markets?
So I'm only an economist. I only play an economist in movies. So who's to know what's going to happen, how this is going to impact actual software companies right now. I think the prospects are still pretty good that software companies are going to continue as usual. Especially the US and Israel have very strong business relationships. There's more than 250 Fortune 500 companies that have R&D facilities in Israel. And there's a lot of R&D that the US benefits and the US corporates benefit from in Israel. And so, I don't know exactly how the tariffs are going to impact the sales of software, of Israeli software in the US, but I know that US corporates are heavily dependent on the R&D that they get out of Israel. And I'm sure something will be worked out that will allow for the free market and all of the benefits that Israeli tech bring to the US to continue. Time will tell.
Thank Brian. Before we wrap up, in just one sentence, I'm asking all of you, what is your favorite thing about Israel? Starting with you, Michal.
The people, for sure. And that's both on a personal level and as an early stage investor, where the team is really the most important factor in our decisions. So it's again, a combination of the brilliance of the people, which is, I think, I'm not objective, obviously, but I think it is really outstanding. And also the fact that people are extremely open and direct and caring, and that creates a lot of arguments, but also a huge, an amazing sense of community and relationships that I think help to build amazing companies in addition to building a great society.
Thank you. Karen?
Well, after such a hard winter here in New York, I have to say the weather. I have to say the weather and the beach. Oh my God. Of course, I'd like to have my friends and family next to me, but give me those 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 ma'alot on the beach in Tel Aviv.
We could use some of that here now, especially this week. Eyal?
Um, well, it's hard because those are the things I like the most, right? The people and the warmth. I think the warmth and the connection of when you come to Israel, I think whether you were born in Israel or you go there for the first time, I feel like you feel at home, which I think is very special because I don't think that you can feel this anywhere else in the world. And the other thing is, of course, food, specifically my mom's food because she's Iraqi. So not putting any of you here down, but yeah, the food in Israel is incredible, and I miss it every time I leave.
Brian, and I sense you had sentiments about the food, but
Yeah, I was going to say Sabich Frischman, but
oh my God, Sabich Fishman is the best, by the
it
way.
is the best. That's how that's what I love the most. No, the food is, people, of course, the weather, of course, the food, absolutely. I would say if I'm left to pick something, I would say the energy, and specifically the energy in Tel Aviv. It is something. It is like nowhere else in the world. Nowhere else in the world. You land, you walk down Rothschild, you walk down Dizengoff, you go to, Florentine, you're sitting at a cafe, just the city is buzzing. The energy in the city is magical, and I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Renan?
I think it's a little bit of a mix of everyone said, but I would say Israeli passion. Like the fact that you can sit down and argue with someone like crazy, but then you also get the best hug ever, like bone-crushing hug immediately at the end and go out. So I think the passion that is brought into everything we do, I think that's it's unstoppable. And it's that I think it talks to a lot of what everyone else here is saying, the caring, from the food to the energy to the warmth to the hot-blooded weather, but all of that comes in together and it's I think it brings out a lot of the best in us, and it brings and it how I don't know, it pushes us forward. So I think kind of coming back, Batel, to your question about October 7th, I think one of the things that post October 7th I keep thinking about is how much Israel and Israelis have shown that they are unstoppable, and we will keep going, and that is not going to be yeah, and just and we'll keep building, and we'll keep and that's how we do things, and the passion is about doing more and doing things that we really care about, and I think that's amazing, and that's what that's what connects us.
Batel, what's yours?
Yeah. I'm going to use the last minute that we have because we have to finish on time, and I'll tell you about Sabich Frischman later. To conclude this webinar with a direct connection to where we started, which is the fact that the coming month will determine whether we continue to be the startup nation, a thriving democracy in a hostile region, or if we allow sectorial interests to, unfortunately, divert us off course. And I think the same way the high-tech community came together and took responsibility since the judicial overhaul, driven by those shared values that we touched base and discussed, we're asking for everybody's support, maybe in the greatest battle, in the battle for Israel's soul. So I'm reminding you that there is elections as I speak to the World Zionist Congress, and every Jew, every Israeli person in the US is eligible to vote. And in these elections, every single vote counts. So please take the time to vote. This is our moment. Let's step up. Let's do it. So thank you again for joining us today. Happy holidays, happy Easter, happy Passover. And to your question, Karen, I think there is no place like home. So, I'm now focusing on not on the distance, but rather how I can impact through the distance. So, yeah. Thank you. Happy holidays, Chag Sameach.
Chag
תודה
Sameach.
שהיית
חג
בוובינר.
שמח.
One.